From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Through these days and weeks, two things have been demonstrated. First, that Ricardo Rosselló doesn't have the capacity to govern, nor the sensibility to govern Puerto Rico.
Thousands of Puerto Ricans take to the streets calling for the resignation of Governor Ricardo Rosselló after the leak of nearly 900 pages of misogynistic, homophobic, and violent text messages between the governor and his staff that also included jokes about victims of Hurricane Maria. In one exchange, the governor called former New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito a whore. Yesterday, she joined hundreds at a protest in New York.
We're in a difficult moment for Puerto Rico. We have an administration, a leader who's showing his true face, his immoral character. So for the benefit of Puerto Rico, as his people are calling for, he ought to resign.
We'll speak with Melissa Mark Viverito in New York and go to Puerto Rico for an update. Then to Syria. After protests against the regime of President Bashar al-Assad began in 2011, a young economics student began filming on a cell phone in her native city of Aleppo. For 5 years, Waad al-Khatib documented her life and the lives of those around her to make an award-winning documentary titled For Sama.
Sama, I know you understand what's happening. I can see it in your eyes. You never cry like a normal baby would. That's what breaks my heart.
Filmmaker Waad al-Khatib and her husband, Dr. Hamza al-Khatib, join us in studio. They flew into New York earlier this morning. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The House of Representatives voted 332 to 95 Wednesday to table a resolution to impeach Donald Trump as Democrats continue to fracture over whether to seek the removal of the president ahead of the 2020 election. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's resisted impeachment calls, focusing instead on congressional investigations. Wednesday's vote came a day after Texas Congressmember Al Green introduced articles of impeachment against President Trump, Green's third such attempt. Ahead of Wednesday's vote, Green cited Trump's racist attack against 4 progressive congresswomen of color, freshman representatives Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar.
This president has demonstrated that he's willing to yell fire in a crowded theater. And we have seen what can happen to people when bigotry is allowed to have a free reign. Look at what happened in Charlottesville. Blood and soil, they screamed. They screamed that Jews will not replace us. And one of them took a person's life who was exercising her constitutional right to protest. We cannot wait. As we wait, we risk having the blood of somebody on our hands. And it could be a member of Congress.
On Wednesday, President Trump doubled down in his racist attacks on the 4 progressive congresswomen of color, calling them hate-filled extremists who are constantly trying to tear our country down. Speaking at a campaign rally in Greenville, North Carolina, Trump singled out each of the 4 for verbal abuse, including Minnesota Democrat Ilhan Omar.
Omar blamed the United States for the crisis in Venezuela. I mean, think of that one. And she looks down with contempt on the hard-working Americans, saying that ignorance is pervasive in many parts of this country. And obviously and importantly, Omar has a history of launching vicious anti-Semitic screeds.
President Trump paused as the crowd around him chanted, "Send her back," before he continued his attack on Congressmember Omar. Trump's remarks came one day after the House of Representatives voted to condemn his racist tweet, telling the 4 Congress members to, quote, go back to the crime-infested places from which they came. Trump's tweet appeared to violate federal workplace discrimination law. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, quote, Examples of potentially unlawful conduct include insults, taunting, or ethnic epithets, such as making fun of a person's foreign accent or comments like, "Go back to where you came from," unquote. Congressmember Ilhan Omar responded to Trump's attack on Twitter, quoting the late poet Maya Angelou. "You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise," Congressmember Omar wrote. Meanwhile, Congressmember Omar introduced a bill Wednesday that would protect the right of people to use boycotts to effect social change. House Resolution 496 reads in part, quote, "Boycotts have been effectively used in the United States by advocates for equal rights since the Boston Tea Party and include boycotts led by civil rights activists during the 50s and 60s in order to advocate for racial equality, such as the Montgomery bus boycott, and promote workers' rights, such as the United Farm Workers-led boycott of table grapes," unquote. The bill is co-sponsored by Georgia Congressmember John Lewis and Michigan Democrat Rashida Tlaib, another of the 4 congresswomen cited by Trump in recent racist attacks. This comes as Congress members of both major parties have pledged support to a non-binding resolution that would condemn the boycott, divest, and sanctions, or BDS, movement against Israel over its human rights abuses and its occupation of Palestinian lands. The House of Representatives voted Wednesday to block President Trump's move to sidestep Congress by allowing U.S. weapons sales to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. House Democrats voted to send 3 resolutions of disapproval of the sales to the White House, where President Trump has promised a veto. Just 4 Republicans supported the measures, which would bar the sale of more than $8 billion of Raytheon precision-guided weapon systems. Critics say such weapons have been used to target civilians in the Saudi-led war on Yemen, which has sparked the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. Meanwhile, the White House said Wednesday it will deploy 500 U.S. troops to the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia as President Trump continues to ratchet up tensions with the kingdom's main regional rival, Iran. This comes as Iranian state television said today its Revolutionary Guard forces have seized a foreign oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz with 12 crew members on board. Iran accuses the sailors of illegally smuggling hundreds of thousands of gallons of Iranian fuel to foreign customers. Sudan's military rulers have agreed to share power with civilian opposition groups, capping weeks of tense negotiations following the massacre of nonviolent protesters last month by Sudanese soldiers. The agreement will establish an 11-member governing body to rule Sudan for the next 3 years ahead of elections scheduled for 2022. The agreement was welcomed by Sudan's ruling generals as well as Sudanese protest leader Ibrahim al-Amin.
Today we look forward to a new phase, one where we can rely on ourselves and move away from all that divides us. Sudan is for all Sudanese people, and yes, those who signed here today are part of the revolution and are a part of the Sudanese people, but their services and support will be reflected in the coming government for all Sudanese people.
Last month, soldiers with the ruling Transitional Military Council opened fire on sit-in protesters demanding democratic reforms, killing more than 100 people and wounding more than 500 others. The World Health Organization's declared a global health emergency as medical workers struggle to keep an Ebola outbreak from spreading beyond the Democratic Republic of Congo. Since last summer, the outbreaks infected over 2,500 people, killing nearly 1,700 of them. In recent days, the virus was found in Goma, a city of nearly 2 million people and a regional crossroads on the DRC's border with Rwanda. Thousands of Puerto Ricans took to the streets Wednesday calling for the resignation of Governor Ricardo Rosselló following the leak of a series of sexist, homophobic and violent text messages between Rosselló and members of his cabinet that also included jokes about victims of Hurricane Maria. While the protests were largely peaceful, police in San Juan tear-gassed demonstrators for the second straight night and made multiple arrests. Protests also took place here in New York, where hundreds gathered in Union Square Park. This is former New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito, who Governor Rosselló called a whore.
We also have the moral character of the governor, who's appealed for the trust, not only from his own party, but also from the Puerto Rican people, so he can be an effective leader. So for the benefit of Puerto Rico, as his people are calling for, he ought to resign.
After headlines, we'll be joined by Melissa Mark Viverito, and we'll go to San Juan for the latest on the protests. The House of Representatives voted Wednesday to hold Attorney General William Barr and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in contempt of Congress for refusing to turn over documents related to their work on the 2020 census. Democrats are seeking information on how Trump administration officials sought to add a citizenship question to upcoming census forms. In May, the New York Times reported a senior Republican strategist who specialized in gerrymandering was secretly behind the efforts, arguing privately that adding the question would benefit Republicans and hurt Democrats. Republican Senator Rand Paul Wednesday blocked passage of a bill to fund health care for first responders to the 9/11 attacks. The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund, which serves those who became sick as a result of their work following the 2001 terror attack, is set to run out of funding next year without congressional intervention. Senator Paul's move came less than a week after the House approved a bill reauthorizing the fund on a vote of 402 to 12. A federal judge in New York City has sentenced the notorious Mexican drug kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman to life in prison, plus 30 years, after he was convicted on a host of charges, including money laundering, international narco-trafficking, and weapons charges. Reading from a prepared statement Wednesday at his sentencing hearing in a federal court in Brooklyn, Guzman complained about his solitary confinement in U.S. custody, calling it psychological, emotional, and mental torture 24 hours a day. Guzman's expected to be imprisoned at a notorious supermax prison in Colorado known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, where he'll likely be granted minimal interaction with other people for the rest of his life. Newly surfaced video shows Donald Trump laughing and gesturing at women during a 1992 party with Jeffrey Epstein, who since pleaded guilty to serial sexual assault of children. The video aired by NBC News on Wednesday shows Trump and Epstein eyeing NFL cheerleaders invited to a soiree at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. Trump is seen gesturing at a woman and telling Epstein, quote, "she's hot." At another point, Trump whispers something in Epstein's ear, causing him to double over laughing. A federal judge in Manhattan is set to rule today on whether Epstein will remain in jail while he awaits trial on fresh charges of sex trafficking of children, or be granted bail and allowed to remain under house arrest in his $77 million New York mansion. Epstein has reportedly been held 3 cells away from the Mexican drug kingpin El Chapo in the federal jail in Manhattan. In Massachusetts, prosecutors have dropped charges against actor Kevin Spacey after his accuser refused to testify about a missing cell phone that allegedly held evidence of a sexual assault. Kevin Spacey denies groping the teenager in a bar in Nantucket in 2016. Spacey was fired from the hit Netflix show House of Cards in 2017 after more than a dozen men accused him of sexually harassing or assaulting them. House lawmakers have ordered an investigation into how the U.S. military experimented with parasites as weapons of war. An amendment to the recently approved 2020 Defense Authorization Bill requires the Pentagon's Inspector General to investigate how the U.S. secretly tested disease-carrying ticks and fleas as biological weapons between 1950 and 1975. This follows the publication of the book Bitten by author Chris Newby, which tells the story of bioweapons researcher Willie Bergdorfer, who studied weaponized parasites at U.S. government labs. Newby contends Lyme disease escaped from a U.S. government lab at Plum Island near Long Island, New York, although that conclusion is widely disputed by medical professionals. In New York City, hundreds of protesters gathered near City Hall Wednesday to mark the 5-year anniversary of the death of Eric Garner, the Staten Island man who was choked to death by NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo, as Eric Garner gasped, "I can't breathe," 11 times. Wednesday's youth-led protest and march came a day after the Justice Department announced it will not file federal charges against Pantaleo, who remains on the police force. This is Gwen Carr, Eric Garner's mother.
My son was killed 5 years ago today.
My son was killed 5 years ago today.
And I'm still feeling that same pain. We have to get those officers fired. The ones who were on the scene that day who murdered my son. So we're calling on the de Blasio administration. Fire those cops.
Fire those cops.
You have the power.
You have the power.
Assert your power.
Assert your power.
Officer Daniel Pantaleo has remained on the police force but could lose his job and pension if found guilty of violating New York Police Department procedures. A disciplinary hearing for Pantaleo wrapped up in June, and a decision is expected next month. Ahead of Wednesday's protest, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio refused to commit to firing Pantaleo. The mayor was questioned by Ebro Dorden of the radio station Hot 97.
Are you going to fire Officer Pantaleo?
Ebro, I'm going to be real with you. There is a law that determines, first, everyone gets due process. You would want it, I would want it, everyone gets it. Second, by state law, that is the police commissioner's decision. I have faith that he is a person who has really worked hard to make this a city that's fair.
But you're his boss.
Again, I'm following the law, and I want to be clear about it. I'm not prejudging. I'm not assuming. There's going to be a decision next month.
And on Hawaii's Big Island, police arrested 33 people Wednesday, most of them Hawaiian elders, as they blocked a road to prevent construction crews from reaching the site of a massive telescope being planned atop the Mauna Kea volcano.
We have a right to worship God in the environment of our belief. Respect it.
The site is considered sacred by Native Hawaiians, who say the construction of the 30-meter telescope was approved without consulting their communities. Just hours after Wednesday's arrest, Hawaii's Democratic Governor, David Ige, signed an emergency order granting police more power to clear the way for construction equipment. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans took to the streets Wednesday calling for the resignation of Governor Ricardo Rosselló following the leak of a series of sexist and violent text messages between the governor and members of his cabinet that included jokes about victims of Hurricane Maria. This is feminist activist Soan Davila.
This is the 7th consecutive day that the people arrive here at Old San Juan to demand that the corrupt Ricardo Rosselló resign immediately. Through these days and weeks, two things have been demonstrated. First, that Ricardo Rosselló doesn't have the capacity to govern, nor the sensibility to govern Puerto Rico. And second, that there's a strong claim from the people, starting with the women, to demand his resignation now.
Some of Puerto Rico's most famous performers, many of whom were targeted in the leaked text messages, joined protesters in the streets. Singers Ricky Martin and Bad Bunny were in San Juan, along with Grammy-winning artist Residente.
We have to defend ourselves. The only ideal that is present tonight is the distress and that we want to be respected as a country. This government needs to begin respecting the country, and this country has never been respected. This is historic. We are making history. Tonight, we are making history. Puerto Rico doesn't stand up because we've always been standing.
While the protests were largely peaceful, for a second straight night, police in San Juan tear-gassed demonstrators and made multiple arrests. Protests also took place here in New York City, where hundreds gathered in Union Square Park, including Hamilton creator Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Takes now should be about the peaceful transition of power and getting out of office. You are the ones who rose up on the street and said enough. We are here to let everyone know the world is watching. We're with you.
The nearly 900 pages of misogynistic, homophobic, and violent text messages exchanged between Governor Rosselló and government officials were leaked by the Puerto Rico Center for Investigative Journalism. In one exchange, the governor jokes about shooting San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz and called former New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito, who's an ally of Yulín Cruz. He called her a whore. Mark Viverito also spoke in New York's Union Square on Wednesday, calling for the Puerto Rican governor to resign.
We're in a difficult moment for Puerto Rico. We have an administration, a leader who's showing his true face, his immoral character. And it's now what's coming out in chat, which is obviously very worrisome. But also, regarding the investigations from the likes of the FBI in Puerto Rico, so there's accusations of corruption. We also have the moral character of the governor who's appealed for the trust, not only from his own party, but also from the Puerto Rican people, so he can be an effective leader. So for the benefit of Puerto Rico, as his people are calling for, he ought to resign.
Two top officials have resigned since the scandal broke, which is being called Ricky Leaks. But Governor Rosselló, who is up for re-election next year, is resisting calls to step down, saying the messages were, quote, done on people's personal time and a result of working long, stressful days. On Monday, a member of the Puerto Rican Independence Party introduced formal complaints against the governor and called for his impeachment. All of this comes as former Education Secretary Julia Kelleher and 5 others have been arrested on charges of steering federal money to unqualified, politically connected contractors. Governor Rosselló has also faced backlash against austerity and privatization measures imposed after Hurricane Maria devastated the island. Well, for more, we're joined by 2 guests. Here in New York, Melissa Mark Viverito, interim president of the Latino Victory Project, former speaker of the New York City Council. She was the first person of color and the first Puerto Rican to lead the New York City Council. And with us from San Juan, Puerto Rico, is Juan Carlos Davila, Democracy Now!'s correspondent in Puerto Rico. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's stay in San Juan for a moment. Juan Carlos, I know we have a big delay between our studio and yours, but if you can just lay out what has been taking place in the streets of San Juan where you have been over the last days.
Yeah, so over the last days, ever since Thursday, there has been a series of protests happening in San Juan to call for the resignation of Governor Ricardo Rosselló. The protests began last Thursday when Ricardo Rosselló arrived to Puerto Rico after his vacation on Europe to actually give a press conference about the first pages of the chat that were filtered. That day, on Thursday, some activist groups called for a protest in front of the governor's mansion, and people started protesting. And I'd say that first protest was around the dozens of people, maybe 100 people. But then things continued to escalate as more pages of the chat were released, by the Center for Investigative Journalism, that they received a leak of a document containing a chat of around 2 months of conversation of the governor with his executive team. Almost a 900-page document, and when that document began to be released, more people felt indignated and went to the streets. And across last weekend, more protests took place. And then on Monday, a huge protest on the thousands, it happened just in front of the governor's mansion, and it was a protest of people protesting in front of the governor's mansion that came together with another one of people marching from the capital of Puerto Rico, and the outcome of that protest resulted in the first clash of violent successes here in San Juan. Then yesterday we saw a second. We saw the first one on Monday, and then yesterday we saw the second events of violence where the people, where the police violently fired tear gas to the protesters that are there demanding the resignation of Governor Ricardo Rosselló.
Melissa, can you talk about your response when you learned of these chats? I mean, you yourself were targeted.
Well, listen, you know what? This is an incredibly difficult moment for us as Puerto Ricanos and those of us that are watching what is happening to the island. I see a lot of similarities with what is happening with the Rosselló administration, with what is happening under the Trump administration. What I do see very differently is the response from the people. We have literally 100,000 people in Puerto Rico yesterday. That would be the equivalent of 300,000 people marching in New York City. This is massive. This is probably the largest, and there's some initial reports saying it may have been the largest mobilization of people in Puerto Rican history, right? So the attacks against me, I don't take them personally. The attacks against me were attacks against every woman, were attacks against Puerto Rico. Those of us who believe in equality and justice and inclusion were literally attacked on that day. And what was expressed in that chat, and I thank you, Amy, for saying it. I mean, people talk about it as profanity laden. No, it's misogynistic. It is homophobic language. These are people
attacking
that are
Ricky Martin.
Right, attacking Ricky Martin, It's very pervasive, and these people are leading the island, making sure that policies are being implemented, budgets are being passed, issues are being addressed, and they are talking in such violent, vile language. So people have rebelled. People are saying this is not representative of who we are. We reject this resoundingly. Yesterday was a clear indication of that, and that the governor has no other option but then to resign. And that is in the best interest of Puerto Rico. If he truly does care, and he says that he cares about the people of Puerto Rico and his island, then he needs to resign in the best interest of all Puerto Ricans.
And what would happen next? I mean, you have a situation where the person who is supposed to follow him also is gone.
Yes. So I think
explain what that's all about.
Right. So there is no special election clause in Puerto Rico, right? So usually what would happen next is the next line of succession would be the Secretary of State, who has resigned in these days. So there is a vacancy there. So there is some internal conversation, I'm sure, and crisis happening within the party that he represents that is figuring out what to do, right? So if the governor does not resign, and again, his staff reiterated that he refuses to resign, then what was going to happen most probably is that the pressure is going to fall on the legislature to start the process of impeachment. And so I believe that the pressure is just, I'm hoping, right, the expectation is that the pressure will get to be so overwhelming and that the legislature would rather not have to deal with this. The legislature is dominated both houses by the party of the governor, that there'll probably be pressure on him to have to withdraw and resign.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. Melissa Mark Viverito was the first Puerto Rican New York City Council leader. She was one of the target of what's called Ricky Leaks right now, which is the text messages on the messaging app Telegram being released of the governor of Puerto Rico and his aides, where, among others, Melissa Mark Viverito was attacked. They joked about shooting the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, and other attacks on everyone from Ricky Martin to Lin-Manuel Miranda, who brought Hamilton to Puerto Rico to raise money for Hurricane Maria survivors. This is Democracy Now! We're going to go back to San Juan and stay with Melissa Mark Viverito in a minute.
Culpa en mis expresiones, pero al igual que Ricky, estoy liberando las tensiones. Le doy fuego a la fortaleza como se supone y al otro día voy a la iglesia para que me perdonen. Mejor no quieras probar de qué estamos hechos. Aquí en el monte heredamos el mismo pecho. Tus disculpas se ahogan con el agua de la lluvia en las casas que todavía no tienen techo. Tú no heredaste pecho, tú heredaste un patrimonio y a ti por la noche te persiguen los demonios. La familia que mataste, destruiste un matrimonio. Esto va por Lilian y su hijo Juan Antonio, esto va para que despierte, esto va por las 4.645 muertes, la hipocresía del país en general, tirar piedra en Venezuela está bien, pero en Puerto Rico está mal, esto va para los artistas internacionales y las banderitas de Puerto Rico en las redes sociales, ninguno de nosotros los supuestos bandoleros está acusado de fraude, robo, lavado de dinero, con todo lo que han robado estos politiqueros, pintamos las paredes del Caribe entero, y aunque esto no le caiga bien mienten a la gente pa' decírtelo en un chat, pa' eso lo digo de frente. Se tiran a los caseríos, a los puntos de droga, les rompen las casas y por ellos nadie aboga. Nosotros hacemos lo mismo sin delicadeza. Estos criminales le hacemos una redada en Fortaleza. Si el pueblo entero quiere que
Sharpening the Knives, released Wednesday by Residente, Ile, and Bad Bunny in protest of Puerto Rico Governor Ricardo Rosselló and his administration. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh as tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans took to the streets Wednesday and before that Tuesday, calling for the resignation of Governor Rosselló following the leak of a series of sexist, violent, homophobic messages between the governor and members of his cabinet that included jokes about victims of Hurricane Maria. This is history lesson Lourdes Torres, who joined protests in San Juan.
The level of corruption and misbehavior that the governor had with the group of corrupts and vultures gets transferred to the management of the Department of Education alongside the secretary. So the demand is resignation and jail time for the guilty and corrupts. We want jail time for Julia Kelleher. It is not reasonable for us that she reaches a negotiation with anyone. We want her to do jail time. All of the corruption scheme and misuse of funds must result in jail time, as the law states.
We're going to stay in the streets of San Juan with Democracy Now!'s Juan Carlos Davila, who has been reporting from the streets there, filming everything that he is seeing, has been there for years covering the protests in Puerto Rico. Juan Carlos, if you can talk about how this movement now, calling for the toppling, the resignation of Governor Rosselló, is feeding on frustration that has been building for quite some time, and also talk about the behavior of the police in responding to these mass protests of thousands. We have a big delay here.
Yeah. So really, these protests are happening right now against Ricardo Rosselló and calling for his resignation are really a catalyst moment, you know, and a catalyst moment in Puerto Rican current history where the Telegram messages and the chats that were released actually made that catalyst happen, because you can see the hypocrisy of the governor, particularly, you know, how he handles, you know, he administers the country, you know, how the hypocrisy within the members of his own party, you know, really showing, you know, a two-face of Governor Ricardo Rosselló. So really, I mean, you would ask why the protests, you know, did not happen before? Why right now, you know, when all this debt and all these austerity measures and the lack of response after Hurricane Maria? So, like I said, you know, this has been an accumulation of many insatisfactions of the Puerto Rican people. And I think what is different of this protest is that Ricky Rosselló, the anger was able to be directed at him specifically, you know, so his figure consolidates all of this, consolidates the corruption of Puerto Rico, consolidates years of neoliberal policies that have been implemented in Puerto Rico, consolidates also and shows the lack of respect that most Puerto Ricans politicians have for the people. So really what this chat that was released is showing is all of these frustrations that for many years the Puerto Ricans have felt, you know. But this is something that has been built up for years, you know. This is the legacy of colonialism and the legacy of U.S. occupation in Puerto Rican territory. This is the legacy, like I said, of many years of neoliberal policies implemented in Puerto Rico, and this is also the lack of response, you know, in regards to Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma. And then also we need to also recognize the work that social movement organizations have been doing for the last years, you know, that they have been able to put out the message there about the corruption, about the illegality of Puerto Rico's debt, and also put out there the problem that Puerto Ricans have with colonialism. So I think that right now all of those problems actually came together, and people can see them very tangible with the chats and the Telegram chat that was released, that document. And in regards to police misbehavior, I mean, this is far, as far as of me covering protests here in Puerto Rico, this is the most violent actions from part of the police that I've seen here. You know, just last night I got a police pointed to me at my chest with a rifle that shoots tear gas canisters, you know, and I got really scared because, you know, they have actually shot the tear canisters directly to people here, not necessarily just to the air like they're supposed to, you know, or, I mean, they're not supposed to do that, first of all, because it's also a residential area. So one of the things here, you know, there's an abusive excess of force being used here in Puerto Rico. And it's very important to say that, first of all, that this area that where the protests are taking place, the protests in front of the governor's mansion in Old San Juan, is also a residential area, so people live there. So also that tear gas is not only in the streets, it's also getting into people's houses, you know, affecting their health. Many elder people live there in Old San Juan. Many families live in Old San Juan. And the protesters have been protesting peacefully, you know, and what they just want to make clear is that they're not going to leave Old San Juan, and they're not going to leave protesting in front of the governor's mansion until he resigns. But then what has been happening is that the police have been using an excessive use of force to actually, you know, oppress the protesters that are really just exercising the right of freedom of speech and actually their democracy of being satisfied with, and their democratic right of being satisfied with the governor and ask for his resignation. And what I've seen here, you know, is really heartbreaking, you know, seeing how the police is really shooting so much tear gas as the protesters, you know, are committed to be there for, you know, to reclaim their freedom of speech, their freedom of expression, and to make use of their democratic right of protest.
And Melissa, can you respond to what Juan Carlos said? And what do you think it'll take for him to leave?
So let's be clear. These are very important points. In the chat, what was also divulged was that government resources, one, were being used against opponents. Sound familiar? It was going after the press for negative coverage. Sound familiar? So there's probably criminal conspiracy here. The other one that was revealed was that they were going after the federal monitor. The police department has a federal monitor in place because of past practices of abuse. And they were going after and utilizing resources of the government to attack and undermining the work of the federal monitor, which now demonstrates, I believe, that now the police department is closing ranks with the governor, right? So this is really serious in terms of what has been revealed in the chat. Also pay to play. Sound familiar? Utilizing government resources to benefit those that supported your campaign. A lot of similarities, again, with what we're witnessing here with the Trump administration, right? And so what has changed, what is very different is that the fact that people are on the streets, people are protesting and saying, we don't accept this, we need this governor to resign. And so the pressure, I think, is going to get overwhelming. And so that's critically important. And I think that we've arrived. And the last thing I'll say, as those of us in the diaspora that are leaders and are working to raise, you know, support and build coalitions to support Puerto Rico, our job obviously has gotten a lot tougher. But we have to close ranks and make sure that we continue to support Puerto Rico, because there is a real conversation. The Trump administration has been hostile to Puerto Rico, has used any opportunity to try to withdraw and take away funds that have been designated for Puerto Rico. And there's already conversations within the Republicans to figure out how they can put more barriers to the receiving of these funds. And then the other thing, those of us that are working to mobilize communities to come out and vote, we need our democratic leadership to step up and support and speak to the Puerto Rican people. This is a historic moment for us. And so if we want to mobilize the Puerto Rican community in Florida, if we want to mobilize the Puerto Rican community that votes in primaries on the island, we do need the support and solidarity of the Democratic leadership. And I think that that's something that definitely we would like to see.
Well, we're going to continue, of course, to follow the study, and we'll be speaking with the Puerto Rican Center for Investigative Journalism that broke this story wide open, based in San Juan. Melissa Mark Viverito, thanks so much for being with us, interim president of the Latino Victory Project, former head of the New York City Council, first Latino and woman of color to head the New York City Council. And thanks so much to Juan Carlos Davila, Democracy Now's correspondent in San Juan, Puerto Rico. When we come back, for 5 years, Waad al-Khatib documented her life and the lives around her in war-torn Syria to make an astounding, award-winning documentary called For Sama. She and her husband, Dr. Hamza, join us in a moment. Stay with us.
Thank you. God bless you.
A Simbonanga, sung by Johnny Clegg during a performance in Frankfurt, Germany in '99, where he was joined on stage by South African President Nelson Mandela. Johnny Clegg died Tuesday at his home in Johannesburg at the age of 66. Clegg was a British-born South African musician who fought against apartheid, his music banned from the radio under South Africa's minority white government. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We turn now to Syria, where Reuters reports airstrikes killed 12 and injured dozens more Tuesday at a market in the northwest province of Idlib. This is the latest in a Russian-backed offensive by Syria's military in northwestern Syria that's killed more than 600 people and at least 157 children in the past 3 months, according to the Syrian Network for Human Rights. The attacks have reportedly targeted schools and hospitals. More than 500,000 people have died in Syria since the uprising against the regime of Bashar al-Assad began in 2011. As demonstrations broke out, a young economics student began filming on a cell phone in her native city of Aleppo. For 5 years, Waad al-Khatib documented her own life and the lives of those around her as the Assad regime intensified its brutal response to the protests. She eventually gathered hundreds of hours of footage. In the course of her stunning, award-winning documentary feature titled For Sama, Waad falls in love with one of the last remaining doctors in Aleppo, gets married, and has a baby girl, Sama, to whom the film is dedicated. This is the film's trailer.
Aleppo, my city. I keep filming. It gives me reason to be here. This is insane. We're getting this every day. None of us had any idea. Hello, Dr. Hamza. How our old lives would be changed forever. Hamza, I'm pregnant.
Sama.
Sama, I've made this film for you. I need you to understand what we were fighting for. I love you so much, even more than the snow. There's lots of airstrikes today, right? Sama, I know you understand what's happening. I can see it in your eyes. You never cry like a normal baby would. That's what breaks my heart.
The hospital has been bombed.
My daughter's in there. Sama, will you ever forgive me?
That's the trailer of the critically acclaimed award-winning feature documentary For Sama. It's directed by Waad Al-Khatib and Edward Watts. The film will be released in the United States next Thursday, screening first in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. To talk more about the film and the war it documents, we're joined here in New York by the director, Waad Al-Khatib. Also with us, Dr. Hamza Al-Khatib, a doctor and co-founder and former director of the Al-Quds Hospital in Aleppo. He is Waad's husband and features prominently in the film. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! I know you just flew in from London here to New York. It is great to have you with us. Go back to your time as a student of economics and your decision to go to Aleppo to start to document what was happening there.
Thanks for having us first. And it's really very heartbreaking and sad, to go back to that great moments when the uprising started in Syria, when we felt that really we don't just can change our life, but also we will change the world. And the feeling, the hope that we have, the powerful about we can really do something to change our life, and the dream of the freedom, all these great principles that we were grow up on, but we didn't thought that we will have it in Syria as country. And that's moment were just very, very important for us. And it was very also, there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation because of the propaganda by Assad regime at that moment. So it was just really important to document this moment and save it to the history, to our life, to the next generation.
Where were you born?
I was born in Aleppo.
And talk about what happened. Start with the protests in 2011.
It was just normal life. I was a student. I had that dream about when I will finish, I will graduate from economics, and then I will go maybe to Germany to have master and start new life outside, and then I will be back later. But I didn't have that feeling of belong to Syria as a country, and I wasn't feel that I'm the Syrian citizen. We weren't that proud of before. And then when the revolution started, we just felt that we are in the moment where we can really change our life and make the country that we want, build our own life in the way that we really respect ourselves and respect the people we have, respect the government that it should be for us. And we've just started the protesting. With the same time, everyone who was activist was trying to make a rule for this cause, and that's why I felt I can film. And I love filming. I really believe in the picture, and that's why I just started document these moments. But no one had any idea about what the future will hold for us.
You never stopped. You just seemed to have that camera on all the time.
Yeah, and really it was very gradually to the moment that you don't think about what you are trying to do or why are you doing this. It's more about just living the life and saving these moments, because you feel that at any moment it could be ended. You could be killed by bombing, by shelling, by anyone arrested you because you are just oppositions. And this was very, very important.
Well, the film is extraordinary on many levels, but also the sense it's quite visceral. The audience feels as though they're literally immersed in the war. And it's also told from a perspective that's very unusual for a so-called war film. You're not on the front lines. You're in a hospital. You're in the room in which you're living with your husband and then your little girl. And at one of the screenings in England, Channel 4 host Jon Snow said, in fact, that you captured a female perspective of a masculine war. Yeah. Do you agree with that?
It's more about, I feel everything was really normal. I had no idea about I will make this film, but I just feel believed in the picture that this is really important to be saved. More than anything about, I will do a film, I will speak in perspective of a woman or a female or a mother or whatever. I just was trying to live my life normally. And it was just a life mixed between the journalist and a journalist in one moment and a mother in a second moment. And the film was just mixed between these two feelings about normal life under the war. And as I was really amazed with the life there, how powerful people were there, how the sadness, how was the happiness, everything I was seeing in my own eyes, I just felt that this is really... Should people outside know about this and know about the war in Syria? It's not just war, it's more about life, and people deserve to be alive.
And Hamza, let me just... You were a doctor when the protests began, but you were based in western Aleppo. And when rebels took control, the opposition took control of eastern Aleppo, you made the decision to move. Why?
Because of, we've seen a lot of areas where the oppositions were taking control in Syria, and the regime immediately started shelling it with different kinds of weapons. I've seen, in Daraa, in Homs. So when it was announced that east part of Aleppo is, liberated from the regime and it's controlled by the opposition, all the images I had is that, YouTube clips that I've seen through the previous year of, children, people being shelled and attacked. And then when I decided just to go there, I'm an activist, I was protesting, and I'm a doctor, so that's the place that I need to be there.
So, Dr. Hamza Al-Khatib, you weren't married at the time you were filming. You sort of fell in love through that lens of your camera, I think. And can you describe the setting up of the Al-Quds Hospital? And who was brought in there? Who were you treating?
The first time I moved to east part of Aleppo, there was it was very chaotic situation, sort of a shelling. People don't used to that. A lot of people fled out of the city to the countryside or to western part of Aleppo because they don't know what's going to happen. And after 2 months, a lot of civilians came back to Aleppo, and the population reached in 2013 it reached 1.5 million people in east part of Aleppo. And that's when, I and a group of doctors decided that we should set a hospital that's a non-trauma hospital. It should be oncology, pediatric, internal medicine, cardiology, because most of the focus of the NGOs was about trauma and surgeries, while there are so many other diseases that people might have. And that's when we decided to start Al-Quds Hospital, and it was previously a private hospital, but it was abandoned, nobody was there. And I went there with 2 midwives, 5 nurses, and a few volunteers. And we start to remove the dust, clean everything. It started with 1 clinic and 8 beds ward. And by the end of 2016, we had around 56 beds and so many specialties, and the staff was 110 people. So the main idea was to have a non-trauma hospital, but it ended as the last hospital in Aleppo.
And when you founded the hospital, because of course the Assad regime targeted hospitals as well as schools, and 8 out of the 9 hospitals in Aleppo had been destroyed. Now, was that the case when you started this hospital? And the fact that you recounted this joke in Aleppo, if you want to be safe, you should go to the front line. That's the safest place in Aleppo. So could you explain that and what exactly the situation was with medical care when you started Al-Quds?
We started Al-Quds at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013. And at that time, there was maybe 5 hospitals in Aleppo. The number increased with more NGOs trying to provide help. The first time we had witnessed a hospital attack was in a hospital called Dar al-Shifa. That was also at the beginning of 2013 or the end of 2012, and a nurse and a doctor was killed at that attack. And throughout the years, the regime has become more aggressive. So it was starting with a mortar attacks, and then aircrafts attack, and then the Russian interfere, and that was the most brutal thing. And in the middle of 2013, we realized that the regime is not trying to attack the militias or the opposition fighters. He's trying to break the will of the people, that there is no way you can live out of my control. So the main target was the hospitals, health facilities, bakeries, electricity, power supplies, schools. And that's why, we know that people who were living there, there are several massacres happened at the city, but the front line, there's no bullets even. Nothing happened. And we start to know, you want to have rest, just go to the front line, and you will be...
Let's go to another clip from the film for Sama.
Sama. Things have got so bad now. Your dad can't leave the hospital. So we live here now. This is our room. Behind those pictures are sandbags to protect from shelling. Yes, I'm coming. We do our best to make it feel like home.
That's a clip from For Sama, the baby who was born in the midst of this war, Wad, that you document from the moment you see your pregnancy test to telling Hamza to raising your child in Aleppo.
Yeah. Sama was in the point that she was the hope of our small family and small life. And the same things was about all the children who were born in that area and in that place, which is for a long, long time. There was many people who have children and trying just to live normal life under this bad circumstances. And it was just, Syrian people wants to live in Syria in a normal way as much as they can under all this shelling and bombardment, and just about how the violence was around, how Assad regime and then later on the Russian were trying just to kill, as Hamza mentioned, the people well and the people feeling about life in the city more than about really having fighting against the fighters who were there.
And can you say, Awad, as you said, the regime did not target the rebels. Can you talk about how the composition of the opposition to Assad changed, and that some areas in Aleppo were in fact held by ISIS and al-Nusra? How did you work with those areas? Did you go into those areas? And what was responsible for those people coming in and, as you say, trying to hijack the revolution?
It's more about, let's say the war in Syria was between Assad and opposition against Assad. But the main things about how the regime was trying not just to have attacking these areas, but also he was trying to increase having al-Nusra and ISIS groups in the area. And as we as Syrians, we see that as facts, and many other centers and study cases was very clear about this issue, that in 2012 the regime released all the people who were in their prisons, which they became later leaders in al-Nusra and ISIS group. So it was more about, the regime knows what is going on, and he was pushing them to be armed and to be more Islamics, and also the violence, which is indirect way to make people more have that bad reaction against what's going on. So people can really don't have the right way to do their own defense against what was happening. And we lived with these people in many places. We faced ISIS in 2013, and many people who we know, they were arrested. And we too. I lost my cousin in 2013, and he's kidnapped by ISIS, and really we don't know anything about him until now. So ISIS, al-Nusra, and the Assad was all against the real people, the activists who were having their own dream about the freedom and the democracy. And this is why the revolution started, and this is what we still need until now. And, it's more about controlling the violence that was happening. And just the idea about we left Syria 3 years ago. We were displaced out of Aleppo, and we've had all this experience about the shelling, bombing, and every bad situation, the siege, and they threatened to be death or displaced. And now, 3 years later, the same scenario happening again in the last place in Idlib, which is like just unbelievable that how the world still watching this and just speak about ISIS, which is really did nothing comparing with the regime violence. And if we just go to any center which they document all this death and like bad crimes.
We're going to have to leave it there, but we'll do part 2. Put it online at democracynow.org. Waad Al-Khatib and Hamza Al-Khatib. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.